AskReddit, what is one time you knew something was off about someone but couldn't prove it? Serious. I hired a guy a long time ago and worked with him for years. Very talented and smart, plus a nice guy. At some point, he started making super strange decisions. Kinda impulsive, very odd stuff, asking if he can invite his girlfriend to a staff meeting, for instance. A lot of shit that didn't make any sense. He got hired to a better job and I lost touch. A few months later, he died of a large number of brain tumors. The timeline his girlfriend turned wife offered matched up with what we'd been noticing for years. I look back in the arguments and realize there's no way I could have known. At the same time, that's kin to the point, you really can't know what's going on with someone, so act accordingly. It's terrifying. I knew of someone who bankrupted his business and left his wife and child financially ruined because he had brain tumors. That went undiagnosed for who knows how long. Be open with your partner's business and spouses about your financial decision-making so they can let you know when your brain is broken. My parents had a close friend when I was pretty young, maybe between 8 and 10 years old. He came over a lot to drink or shoot guns with my dad, but I didn't like him one bit. He just gave me a bad feeling. I remember sticking my tongue out at him every time his back was to me. Never said anything to my parents though, I just stayed away when he was over. My mom ended up hiring him to work at the pawn shop she ran, and after he started things went missing. I don't remember how they figured out he was stealing, but he had a gallon Ziploc filled with jewelry. The cops tried to convince the owner not to press charges since he got the jewelry back, but the owner went through with it. As soon as they booked him, his fingerprints came back from an unsolved double homicide. He had brutally murdered an elderly couple when they came home mid-robbery. After he killed him, he drank their milk, leaving his prints on the jug on the counter. I have a little kid, bad feeling story like this, but I have no resolution to it. When I was really young, we left this church when I was so prior to that there was a guy at church who gave me the creeps, but I didn't know how to express that at the time. He wasn't related to me, but was related to my cousin on the other side of their family. So he was around us a lot at church. I was like 4, so I had no concept of age, but I thought he was a grown-up, but not old. He could have been anywhere from 16 to 25, I think, but probably early 20s. Anyway, he liked me and showed me a lot of attention. But I didn't like it. It wasn't anything that raised anyone else's alarm bells, and I have no memory of him touching me inappropriately. But I have such a strong memory of wanting to avoid that guy. He helped in my Sunday school class sometimes, and I can remember standing outside the door and trying to peek through the crack in the door and listening really carefully to see if he was in there before I went in. And if I heard or saw him, I would go ask my aunt if I could stay in her class with her that day. She taught older kids. I just remember feeling really desperate to avoid him in those moments. Again, he wasn't mean to me. He was nice to me. I just didn't want his attention. I didn't want to sit on his lap. None of it. Something just bothered me about him. Thankfully, we changed churches, and I never saw him again. I don't have a real way of finding out what happened to him. The people I could ask are dead, but I think about him once in a while and wonder if he ended up in prison or something. WTF happened after? Was your mom all right? Did you press charges? Yes, she managed. She was genuinely fighting for her life. She didn't press charges, and the lady had the audacity to keep showing up to our house, but my mom continuously denied her entry. Eventually she stopped showing up, and I don't know where that lady is now. I was confused as to why my mom suddenly didn't want the lady in our house anymore, and she never told me about the incident until years later, and she didn't press charges because, again, she tends to be overly nice. My mom used to have this friend years ago when we lived in a pretty nice-looking house, and she would often show up uninvited and act too comfortable in our house. My mom would always just say that it's probably just because that lady comes from a different culture, but I was suspicious of the lady stealing some stuff from our house. One day the lady invites my mom to the beach. My mom has a huge fear of water and can't swim at all, so she avoids it. But she tends to be overly polite, so she decides to go. At the beach, the lady pressures my mom to go swim, assuring her that they'll stay close to the shore and whatnot. The lady ended up shoving my mom in and standing back to watch as my mom had a difficult time keeping herself up and trying to swim back to shore. Reminds me of my brother's friend in college. I was a freshman, and my older brother and friends were seniors and had a shitty house off campus where we'd party and drink every weekend. There was this one guy who basically looked like Charlie Sheen from the movie The Rival. Real wiry and all. So one night I'm in the kitchen grabbing a drink while everyone else is upstairs, and this dude comes up behind me and out of nowhere choked me super hard, like about as hard as anyone could, and did it for the longest time. I was legitimately frightened because it was so random and the hardest I've ever been choked. Just as I began to black out and die, he lets go, slaps me on the back like it was one big joke, and goes right upstairs. I was just standing there holding my neck and catching my breath, wondering WTF that was all about. No reason at all. Adult me would have fucked him up as soon as he let go, but young skinny me was just terrified. I never told anyone, but I never hung around him alone again. That dude was scary. My best friend was a wealthy only child. We went to the same college, and he had his own apartment off campus. His party lifestyle attracted good and bad attention. Eventually, an older mid-20s guy latched onto him and moved into the spare room with his girlfriend. This guy had a big fake smile and was constantly talking about holistic medicine, aromatherapy, blah blah blah. His girlfriend was basically a slave that cooked and cleaned up after him. I spent less time with my friend, but I was there the day things boiled over. Items had gone missing and my friend was upset. He accused Mr. Asshole of stealing from him, and that led to a fist fight. 1-6 for 250 lbs broke up the fight and kicked out the unwelcome guest and told his GF to pack their shit. Turns out the holistic medicine they favored was heroin. The girlfriend was a runaway whose family was desperate for her return. She made it home and went into rehab after he got arrested in an airport out west carrying 2 ounces of sneezing powder in his hand luggage. He was wanted in 3 states for trafficking, and someone who hated him even more than I did set him up for a 20-year stay at Club Fed. My best friend at the time worked with a guy who I had met a few times as I joined them for after-work drinks, clubbing, etc. I always felt uncomfortable being around him but didn't know why. He was nice enough and quite funny, but something just seemed off. Anyway, we were out one night and he seemed extra off and ended up disappearing from the club. We found out 2 days later that he had gone home, killed his GF, dismembered her body and put her in the bin out the front of his house. A former friend's husband. He always tried just that bit too hard to fit into the group and be involved in everything. Always had to be the smartest guy in the room. I don't know what it was, but I disliked him from the moment we met, and there's not that many people I dislike. Long story short, he turned out to be a controlling, emotionally abusive sack of shit who hated me because I kept encouraging my friend to be independent, and my husband and I encourage each other to have a life outside of each other. A friend of a friend DM'd me out of the blue a few weeks ago and right off the bat felt the creep vibe. Tried to be nice, asked how things are going. And within minutes and without prompting, he was oversharing how he'd lost touch with all his friends since getting out of jail, how all he'd ever wanted was to have kids, so he left a legacy not to parent them but just to pass on his family name genes, and how lonely he was. His wife is in the midst of her 3rd bout of cancer and is little more than half his age, and I kept bringing her up in the conversation because he was getting more and more open. Like not even flirtatious, just dropping very obvious intentional hints at wanting to F me. The first time he was like, yeah, I love my wife, but with the cancer we can't really do nothing in the bedroom. I would never leave her though and will always take care of her. The second time he made a more blunt innuendo at me. I told him it made me uncomfortable, so I'd be blocking him and would not like to be contacted again. Didn't wait for a response before hitting block. He was in jail for dealing. I was not aware. He overshared without prompting. I don't believe my friend does drugs or knew either, because this guy alluded to the fact they haven't talked in a while and asked if I still talk to him. Asked my friend about him afterward. He said that guy has been making women uncomfortable for as long as he's known him. I asked if he'd ever mentioned me, and the really creepy part is he said he had not, meaning his creepy friend went out of his way to look me up. I am not pretty or in a shape and avoid social media, so he had to have dug deep to find my one active account. I've since changed my password, passcode, and email, and the other day decided to go full paranoid and change my phone number. I cannot explain or have any proof this guy is violent or psychotic, and it wasn't the being in prison thing that really got to me, it's just the vibe. Like when you see a wild animal in an urban area and can tell it's that desperate or possibly. A friend of a friend DM'd me out of the blue a few weeks ago and right off the bat felt the creep vibe. Tried to be nice, asked how things are going, and within minutes and without prompting he was oversharing how he'd lost touch with all his friends since getting out of jail, how all he'd ever wanted was to have kids, so he left a legacy not to parent them but just to pass on his family name genes, and how lonely he was. His wife is in the midst of her third bout of cancer and is little more than half his age, and I kept bringing her up in the conversation because he was getting more and more open. Like not even flirtatious, just dropping very obvious and intentional hints at wanting to F me. The first time he was like, yeah, I love my wife, but with the cancer we can't really do nothing in the bedroom. I would never leave her though and will always take care of her. The second time he made a more blunt innuendo at me. I told him it made me uncomfortable, so I'd be blocking him and would not like to be contacted again. Didn't wait for a response before hitting block. He was in jail for dealing. I was not aware. He overshared without prompting. I don't believe my friend does drugs or knew either, because this guy alluded to the fact they haven't talked in a while and asked if I still talk to him. Asked my friend about him afterward. He said that guy has been making women uncomfortable for as long as he's known him. I asked if he'd ever mentioned me, and the really creepy part is he said he had not, meaning his creepy friend went out of his way to look me up. I am not pretty or in a shape and avoid social media, so he had to have dug deep to find my one active account. I've since changed my password, passcode, and email, and the other day decided to go full paranoid and change my phone number. I cannot explain or have any proof this guy is violent or psychotic, and it wasn't the being in prison thing that really got to me, it's just the vibe. Like when you see a wild animal in an urban area and can tell it's that desperate or possibly. In law school, I had a guy who sat in front of me for contracts every day for a year. He definitely gave off some serious red flags when he would answer questions, etc. Second year of law school, and I didn't have any classes with the guy that I know of. Apparently he wasn't going to class anyway. I have no idea what took place, but one day the dude shot his mother and then himself with what I remember to be an AK-47. Had a guy in high school who was overly pushy about wanting to hang out with me after only knowing me for a day. Would constantly message at all hours of the night. One day when on my way home I took a back way and passed by him laying in his car down the road from my house just watching. Needless to say, I blocked him on everything and cut all contact. Fast forward 3 years, and he was charged for murdering his sister's son who he was fostering. The little boy was only months old and had evidence of months of excessive physical abuse that eventually led to him dying. Had a guy in high school who was overly pushy about wanting to hang out with me after only knowing me for a day. Would constantly message at all hours of the night. One day when on my way home I took a back way and passed by him laying in his car down the road from my house just watching. Needless to say, I blocked him on everything and cut all contact. Fast forward 3 years, and he was charged for murdering his sister's son who he was fostering. The little boy was only months old and had evidence of months of excessive physical abuse that eventually led to him dying. You know that one friend some girlfriends or boyfriends have that make you feel they don't want to be just friends with you. Sulfur monoxide. There was one my ex-girlfriend had that gave me that feeling. Very hard to prove when it could be just me being paranoid. I guess I was right since my ex-GF and that friend of hers is now her husband and the father of her kid. I've been friends with a dude for years who all my BFs have said this about. But it was genuinely just friendship and nothing at all romantic. Until 6 months ago, something just changed with us and now we are totally in love. We didn't have those feelings at all before, so maybe your GF didn't at the time too. Edit, added a word. We got a new drama teacher when I went into my school's 6th form. He was my form tutor, and he just gave off very bad vibes. None of us could figure out what was wrong with him. I didn't like him from day one, and this guy knew we didn't like him. He'd skip our form classes, just mark us as been there. He was supposed to teach us for part of our A-level exams, but never showed up. He always said what he was doing in the lower school was more important, and to quit bugging him. He'd been at the school for 2 years when I left. A year later I was at the Girl Guides, just visiting after uni, and found out he'd been fired for having a relationship with a 15-year-old. A kid he'd taught since she was 12, may have been vanishing to be with her when he was skipping our classes. So freaking gross. My sister's husband, I met him before they got married, and I told my mom that I didn't trust him. He ended up being seriously abusive and caused my sister to have 3 miscarriages, and the one kid who made it through the entire pregnancy is in foster care. She's only 5 months old and I haven't been able to see her because they took her the day she was born. During the dot-com boom I worked for a company, and as with most of these startups, funding was critical. The CEO knew an investor named John. John came well recommended and supposedly had ample funding offshore. I have a very well-tuned bullshit meter, and it hit max setting with this guy. I tried to tell the CEO and others that he was full of shit, but they were enamored with him. In the end he milked what little money the company had and left the CEO holding the bag and personal bankruptcy. I helped a band out on their tour for 2 stops in different countries. I adored this band and was a bit of a groupie for the drummer. But the singer, who literally every single person loved, gave me insanely bad vibes. He is extremely famous in the country he's from, and about a year after helping them the lead singer got done for a number of things, including Saw. He's in prison now but still has a crazy amount of fans posting support for him. Guy at my work, we're all 16 to 20, crew came from a friend who worked there. He was super friendly, cool guy. Bad vibes since day one. Keep in mind this is intro fast food for high schoolers and ex-felons, dealers, so there's really no in between except for the owner and his daughter. This guy has a perfectly clean record, worked off jobs through life from what he said. Caught him slipping powder into a girl's drink 2 weeks later after she confirmed a off vibe about him a day before. No clue what management did with him, but he disappeared right after and discontinued his hash dot. My cousin married this nice woman, which was odd because he and his family are shitty people, and it why any nice woman would marry him. He also was very shitty to his first wife, who had died of a brain aneurysm. I met his wife's mom once. She was this quiet, unassuming lady who didn't say much as his mom. My mom and a few others kept talking. Before coming in, I assumed they were poor schmucks who didn't know which way was up. But when I saw her, I had this involuntary need to shit myself. I didn't. She was dressed very simply, no airs. She looked straight at me and told me to use a particular skin cream to improve my pigmentation issues. Then went back to being quiet. I felt like I just had to obey her, and I ordered the cream online 5 minutes later. Much later, we found out that this new wife's dad was a consigliere sort of man for a pretty prominent politician. And if he wanted you gone, you could be pretty gone. Apparently my cousin and his family were told by some men that they knew all about his first wife, and if he didn't take the bonds of marriage seriously enough this time. They would take the death do us part bit quite seriously. They've been married for 15 years now with a couple of kids. My cousin's mom is a total bitch and bully usually, but she has been on the straight and narrow since the wedding. From the moment my grandma left Grandpa to pursue a relationship with a new man, I was very upset. But the man was always off. His voice is cold, very arrogant but plays dumb. Everything bad happened around him. My first visit with them at a B&B I was sod. I was only 11. They told my mom but did nothing about it, and all three told me to keep it from my dad. Too many things to mention, but within the span of 3 years while in his care my mother and grandmother died. Unexpectedly and very, very tragically. He doesn't cry, post about it, nothing. I've never trusted him, and I never will. Once when I was like 13, some guy messaged me on Instagram. He told me that he used to go to my school and that he knew all of my friends. He was able to give me their names, so I believed him. He said that he was 16, which for some reason was fine with me at the time. He kept asking me to send him a picture of me or to video chat. This was when I realized something was off. I refused to show him what I looked like, and he started to get mad at that. He asked me a few more times to show him my face, and when I said no, he blocked me. He never said anything really very concerning, but I wish I had told my friends about it. Maybe I could have gotten more info on him. IDK, I regret talking to him in the first place. I could prove it and people didn't believe me. Someone, years ago, was catfishing an entire group of people I used to roll with. Suffice to say, after how some of the people in that group twisted my arm to let it go, that I was being paranoid. I was angry about having to say I told you so. My friend B has a friend I know which is called M. Friends to the point B was a maid of honor. B worked her ass off for her wedding and party and everything the maid of honor is in charge of. Spent a lot of money and then bought her beautiful and expensive gifts cause that was the day for one of her closest friend. Also, B is always here when M has an issue. On the other side, I felt like M was never asking about B's life. Never asking her if she was okay. Was never really interested about anything concerning B. I've talked about it to B but very soft. Telling her I felt like M was using her. She didn't really believe me and thought I was being extra. Back to yesterday, the third friend of B is taking care of B's birthday present. M doesn't feel concerned. Doesn't want to look for anything. She wants third friend to do the job. We all decided we should go for the Lion King. After buying tickets, M said she thought only B was going to see the show. What friend sends another friend to see a show? Alone the day of her birthday FFS. We explained this made no sense. The idea was to spend that time with her. She said she already seen the show and doesn't want to go. M also didn't offer to pay a bit for B's ticket, which is not even the issue at this point, but the fact she doesn't want to spend time with her closest friend the day of her birthday. And I cannot tell that to B who still thinks M is a great friend. When I was going into 5th grade, my mom had a sense that one of the teachers, Mr. H, was wrong somehow. She was a teacher in another school and pulled some strings to get me in another class. My teacher, Mrs. S, ended up being horrible, and she felt guilty for making me be in her class. A few years later, Mr. H murdered his wife and then killed himself in front of their two small children. So, my mom's spidey sense was on point. I used to be friends with this girl, and while I was friends with her, I was constantly angry, and she constantly pissed me off. I never could out my finger on why that happened or why I was angry, mostly after being around her. It wasn't until she did some fucked up shit to me and a lot of others and I stopped being friends with her did I realize she was my anger source. I knew something was wrong, and I didn't know it was her until I stepped outside of the room and saw her outside of my biases. Before then, I could never prove my anger, and it was just there. A lot of the comments on here talk about bad vibes and gut feelings and then eventually being proven right like it was obvious all along. Don't forget that the majority of people that give you bad vibes probably have anxiety disorders, are on the autistic spectrum, or have some other problem that causes them to give off that energy. Please don't be treating them like they're all rapists and murderers. Just wanted to say that I pick up on anxiety and autism, and I think they're nice vibes. Bad vibes for me come from mannerisms similar to what I grew up seeing in my malignant narcissist father. It stems from when their words don't match their actions or body language, and it puts me in a state of cognitive dissonance and unease, because it signals deception. Also, it's a certain type of stare. Anyway, just wanted to say if you're anxious or neurodivergent, I like your vibes. My best friend, which is an 18-years-old female, fell for a guy 27. Why I never liked him from the first time I saw him. Despite the big age gap, he wasn't the right person for her. I tried to tell her many times and she didn't listen because he was nice, sweet, handsome, and many girls liked him. She'd always tell me that I'm just jealous, even though I had a boyfriend in which I had a healthy relationship with. NVN. Time passed and they stayed together for almost 6 months, not really sure. And he suddenly stopped talking to her for no reason. Always telling her hi's busy and never send a message or meet her. We live in the same neighborhood. She started to get suspicious. At that time her mother was very sick. She had an operation, so she needed him to be by her side. He never did. He didn't even ask for her mother, even though he knows her. And he had talked to her many times by the phone. She broke up with him eventually because she needed time.
Thank you all for watching. If you would like to continue reading more of the stories on the thread, I will leave the link for it down in the description. Remember, like and subscribe. Have a great